So with that, I'd like to move on to our panel. We have an amazing panel of food system experts, three amazing women from different parts of BC who are right in the trenches and also in the leading edge of figuring out how to strengthen local food systems, how to relocalize food systems, how to weave, the producers back into the mix. So you're going to hear from these, and again, these three ladies, and they're, wonderful, wonderful human beings. The bios got sent out, and it's hard to even know where to begin, but I'll say Crystal Penbrink comes to us from Squamish Food Policy Council, where she's the executive director, and she was one of the co-founders of the Squamish Food Policy Council. And that actually came out of the Squamish Climate Action Network. So pretty neat in terms of, kind of the DNA for a local food policy council that is coming from the climate action place. She's been behind numerous grassroots food initiatives, gardens, farm food education workshops, and so on. Total dynamo, and you'll find out more from her when she introduces herself. We have Liz Blakeway from the Land to Table Network in the North Okanagan, and that's a regional food system network in that area. It's modeled off of the Vermont Land to Table, Farm to Table concept, and she'll fill you in on that. And Liz again brings like a really neat sort of systems background to the work she's doing, systems and planning. And then Melissa Hemphill from Revelstoke. She's been a cornerstone of many things food related in Revelstoke for many years. Among the hats she wears, she is the food security coordinator there, and has played a big role in terms of their food security action plan. And again, taking a very holistic view of how we rebuild food systems. What I love about all these three women is their generosity of time and sharing their expertise, sharing what they've learned, and also their humility about what they don't know. And again, recognizing we're kind of sailing in uncharted waters these days. So with that, again, the style of this is going to be kind of a little bit more conversational, a little bit informal. We said we didn't tell them PowerPoint presentations. Some of them may have a slide or two to share. We'll see, right? So I will ask if we could start. So our first question is just really to give each Melissa, Crystal, and Liz an opportunity to introduce themselves. So they've got about 4 or 5 minutes to do that. So I will say, do you want to kick us off there, Melissa? You're at the top of our screen.
Yeah, perfect. So you can hear me okay? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm Melissa Hemphill, and my position is co-director of community outreach and development with Community Connections Revelstoke Society. And this is a new role for me, and so I'm helping to direct the department, but also still doing that food security coordinator role simultaneously. So Community Connections Revelstoke is really similar to the Community Connections in your neck of the woods. It's a social service agency, and we do all kinds of things, and I look after the food side of things. So as food security coordinator, I work with farmers and chefs to support them, bring them together, provide them with resources and information. And pre-COVID, used to organize a bunch of workshops and educational things, and now it all happens online through other agencies, so that's wonderful. It has come to us. I've been working with the City of Revelstoke on our official community plan and helping to get food security language into that document. It's an uphill battle, as Crystal will probably tell us about, but we're getting there, so that's really great. I chair our market advisory committee and help to run our farmers market, which is, there's 2 in Revelstoke. It's a big story. I'm not going to get into it, but I run the good one. And I help to run a bunch of different community food events and really see food as a wonderful connector of people. And so I help navigate the food safety permit side of things and just help to organize community food events. I'm in the final stages of building a community kitchen. So again, similar to what Community Connections in Southeast BC has done. And yeah, we got drywall up. It's happening. It's very exciting. And our intention with that kitchen is twofold. It's to provide a rental space for food entrepreneurs to help build our value-added food product lineup for our community, and to produce meals for our food bank. So, and then of course there's food literacy and workshops and all kinds of great things that can happen in that space too. So we're really excited to get that off the ground. I'm part of this new director role is managing the food bank. So got my fingers in a lot of food pots, and I'll talk about that in my presentation in a little bit. In addition to my paid work here with Community Connections, I'm also on the board of directors for the Revelstoke Local Food Initiative. And so that's a kind of grassroots, boots on the ground organization that runs community gardens, education programs, celebrations of local food, and they're the lead on the farmers market. So together with those 2 hats, yeah, get to help out with a lot of food things in the community. That's me. Sometimes I garden too, not very often.
Like, when do you have time? So we'll work our way counterclockwise, or no, clockwise around the screen. So Liz, you're up next, and then I'll just ask Crystal to jump in after Liz is complete. Awesome.
And I'm gonna do some screen sharing here. I made a couple of slides in the end, so perhaps a little bit less organic than I had intended to be. And I might even do this a little bit backwards, in that I'll share about our organization like up front, and then I'll provide some examples as the conversation unfolds. So yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I had really wished to be there in person, but that's okay, soon. And it's really fun to have conversation alongside Melissa and Crystal. We see each other in online meeting circles, but it's nice to be able to compare and contrast and have this opportunity to kind of reflect on land to table. And my feet touch the ground in Secwepemcúlecw, in a community that I know of as White Lake. So I just thought I would touch really briefly on the North Okanagan. So we're made up of 6 municipalities, 5 electoral areas, with Vernon as our urban center, and in the traditional territory of the Secwepemc and the Syilx people. And so Land to Table is pretty new, I would say, in many ways. We're a regional food system network. So we're made up of actors and stakeholders from across our food system, including producers, processors, wholesalers, distributors, retailers, chefs, consumers, food waste managers, and organizations like government, nonprofit, Indigenous communities, and academic institutions. And we think of a network basically as a group of people and organizations who are coming together to work together as equal partners to achieve a common vision, purpose, and goals. And we began as a study circle in 2015 around a kitchen table. And that was a group of women, mainly from farming families, who were really inspired and studied together the Vermont farm to plate collective impact model. They thought that that was a really good example to test out in our region because of the impact that that model had in terms of increasing economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and social accessibility across the food system in Vermont. And so similarly, we took on the vision to build a thriving, healthy, just, and resilient food system in the North Okanagan. So yeah, like I said, we're relatively new. We're just kind of coming 4 years old. In January 2018, we held our first forum, which focused on growing the local food economy. And I would say that's where much of our project work has also focused over the last 4 years. And it was in the fall of 2018 that I came on board, and we were able to secure some larger chunks of funding to get us going through our regional district and a real estate foundation grant. Land to Table as a network, we are really acting as a convening and coordinating backbone. So we think of our network as a backbone organization, and that's kind of from that collective impact language, where basically our mission as a nonprofit network is to catalyze connections and collaboration to mobilize network participants, ideas, knowledge, and energy across our food system. We consider our function as twofold, and I think that this really speaks to our niche as a network, which is to build a connected and coordinated network. So we're working to reduce duplication efforts across our food system. We're providing opportunities for relationship building and connecting ideas, and also ensuring that we have some clear and consistent communication about what's happening in our food system. And then the other function is to strengthen our food system through action. So that looks like time-bound, specific projects that we undertake with partners. So that means that our projects have network and community support, energy, and funding behind them, which has been a huge focus of our work over the last 12 months specifically. And I think that this really is a big differentiation for Land to Table as a network, which comes with different opportunities and challenges, in that we don't host or hold long-term programs like other organizations in our region do. And that means that we don't necessarily have access to that multi-year programmatic funding that others do. And that connects directly to our structure, which is we're not a nonprofit organization in ourselves, but rather we're fiscally and legally hosted by the Social Planning and Research Council of BC, who are a registered federal charity and who receive funding on our behalf. And so we have an MOU with them that helps outline that relationship. And so I'm the network director, a contracted position for Land to Table through Spark BC. And then the last 2 points that I think really speak to our niche as a network and lends to our success in terms of impact is our focus and approach really centers support for small to medium scale farmers for a variety of reasons, but really because local food production is so integral to these 4 pillars of creating meaningful food systems change, which is to say that basically we can't have a strong local food system without strong small and medium-sized farms. And then lastly we're guided by a steering committee, which I think is one of our core strengths, and that's made up of key partner organizations who represent our network. And they add a lot of credit and robustness to our work. And that includes folks from UBC Okanagan, Interior Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Community Futures, the Okanagan Indian Band, as well as local farmers, Young Agrarians, and Organic BC. And I think probably the opportunity in our structure as a network and what success looks like for us this year in particular really comes down to our ability to be nimble in terms of how we respond to what the food system needs, especially given the climate extremes and disruptions that we've experienced. And I'd be really happy to share specific examples of what that looks like as our conversation unfolds. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm okay to jump in. You can hear me? Okay. Hello, I'm Crystal Tinbrink. I'm here virtually through on the lands of the Squamish people, but raised on the lands of the Katzie people, also known as Maple Ridge. So thank you so much for having me, and so great to also learn more from Melissa and Liz about the really important work that they're doing, and also hear some reflections of the work that you folks are doing in the east side of the province. It's really exciting. So I'm here representing Squamish Can. I work as the executive director, not without thousands of hours of volunteer work to get to this place. So hearing Melissa talk about her volunteer work outside of her paid work is so true. And I'm sure a lot of you in the room are also like, yeah, got lots of volunteer work on my plate, probably always adding more, and really, really dedicated and fueled by passion for change. So Squamish Can is a climate action network. We've been around since 2009. We just went through a strategic plan, so I'm going to read our new mission statement. It's to empower our community with just, actionable solutions to the climate crisis through education, policy development, and systems change. And we do that by working on zero waste initiatives, energy, active transportation, and sustainable food systems. And at the very beginning, not long after we were drinking beers and watching movies about climate change and getting all riled up and trying to figure out, do we need another environmental group in Squamish? There were already two. One was working on the stream keepers. They were citizen scientists working on all kinds of really cool things, saving fish. Love those guys. And then there was another group that was focused on watersheds and the estuary and removing outdated industrialized forestry plots of land to sort of rejuvenate them back into their natural systems. And we're sort of like, I don't know. We do, basically. We came to the conclusion that local cities and local communities do need climate action groups, and it's a daunting topic. It's a really daunting thing, but I think providing the place-based work in your local community can actually feel like you can contribute to creating resilient food systems and resiliency within your natural resources and your natural scapes. So am I going on to the next question? No. Okay, just checking. We're not talking about the local food system quite yet. Okay.
Crystal.
Anyways, I'll just share a little bit more. So Squamish Can begun, and quite early on, we started doing policy change. We saw that there was, for example, like urban agriculture policy did not exist. There was you weren't allowed backyard bees or chickens, or you had them, but anyways, it was really weird and convoluted, and you were also limited on how many greenhouses and the size of greenhouses you were allowed in your backyard. And so we started going to council and going to meetings and trying to get policy to change or to be developed to be able to support urban agriculture. We have agriculture land. A lot of it is massively in the floodplain or it's heavily forested. So we do not have a lot of available agriculture land that's actually in the ALR, but we do have some other land that is not in the ALR that is used for growing food. And then, so basically we started doing policy before we even really thought that we were doing it. And before you know it, policies were changing and we're like, cool, okay, we need to change more policy. So at the same time, there was a provincial movement. Liz and Melissa were there 5 years ago when there was a huge focus on establishing food policy councils and understanding what the heck is a food policy council, what do they do, what is the purpose of them, all those things. I mean, I had all those questions as well. And so Ingrid spoke at the beginning. You know, we're all learning each day, and we've learned a lot over the last decade of doing this work. And so yeah, it's a long process, but when I think back about 10 years ago, I'm like, ooh, we've done actually some really cool stuff, and it's nice to feel proud about that work. Needless to say, we started a food policy council in 2015 after getting a food charter endorsed by the District of Squamish. This charter acted as an educational tool that provided basically a framework where all community groups and citizens supported it. We were like, yeah, this is a great vision for how we want our food system to look like, everything from farmers to food recovery to compost and all of the moving parts within the food system. And then we established the Food Policy Council, and similar to Liz and their network, it's to ensure that all members of the community have access to nutritious, safe, ecologically sustainable, and culturally appropriate food at all times. And when you think about some of the national movements happening, like with the Coalition of Healthy School Food and some of the other things, it's like this holistic thing of like, we all want a sustainable food system with culturally appropriate food that's healthy, that's just, that's safe. We want all of those things. So I love that there's this synergy with what we want, either as a local organization, regional or national. So I think that there's some really beautiful synergies happening, and I'm really excited to share a little bit more about what Squamish Can does in the next question. Sorry about that confusion.
All right, thank you. And I'm just going to jump back over here. So we're going to now move into some specific questions. So we crafted a question for each of our panelists. They'll have an opportunity. I'm going to actually ask you guys to, I'm looking at you, but you can't see that, or can you? Yeah, all right, I'm looking at you. If you could sort of do this answer in 4 minutes just to catch up a little bit of time. So they'll have the main person will have a chance to give you a little bit more insights of what they're doing. Our other 2 panelists will have like a minute each to sort of give maybe another perspective. And then we have an opportunity to field questions for all of you. So it's about sort of 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes per topic. So I'm going to start off with Crystal. And Crystal, it's great. You already sort of set the stage for your question when you were introducing your organization, Squamish Food Policy Council. But really our question to you is, why does local food policy matter? And how should we be approaching it in a changing climate, i.e., and you can take changing climate to mean our physically changing climate. I'll leave it to you how you want to take changing climate.
Thanks, Ingrid. Yeah, pretty big daunting topic, like I said before. I think because we no longer think about climate change as this environmental thing. I no longer consider myself an environmentalist. I actually consider myself more of like a social advocate, because the work that we do, the work through the climate lens has to benefit the land and the people and the quality of the food and like everything. Everything has to improve. And so even with our new strategic plan, thinking about climate change and the impacts to food, we're talking about food and energy price instability. We're talking about dietary preferences, the increase of population growth, in particular, not just globally, but in our region. I can't believe, so Squamish itself is the third largest growing population or community per capita in Canada. And so I don't even know how to express to you how insane it is in Squamish with how many people are moving here. And I'm just sort of like, save the land. Don't build things on the land because there's no more land. And so other things to consider is not just population growth, but the importance of localizing food systems and even through a regional lens. And so just that component, there's so much evidence, whether it's anecdotal or actually proven through academic research, that localizing your food system will help you become more food resilient. It will help create and establish jobs in your communities. It will socially connect us better, thus make us healthier, because we have human to human connection, and we have human to land connection and human to animal connection. There's also the reduction of food being traveled and being able to prepare better for when natural disasters happen. For us, and I don't know about you, but the word heat dome, I didn't actually know was a thing. Atmospheric rivers, also a new thing. And so these things that are happening, perhaps more frequently than we'd like them, they're sort of in our face right now. And so feels like a strong sense of urgency. I'm assuming many of you also feel that strong sense of urgency. So, your friends in Squamish are with you there. I think a lot of, in particular, we saw how the food system was impacted during those emergencies and during those crises. And so there's never been a better time to really think outside of the box and sort of focus on that localized food system, and then where's there synergies within the region. So, for example, Squamish doesn't necessarily grow a lot of food, but Pemberton does, and Lillooet does, and Lillooet Nation does. So where are the synergies within our own region, even though we're a few hours away? And I think it's probably the same for the Kootenays as well. I know that the regions are far apart, but there still is synergies that could happen over purchasing food from other places. So I really do believe that procurement work, which is, or policy work, we'll start with policy, it's a bit of a top-down approach. The work that many of us are doing is a bottom-up grassroots approach, which is so essential. It drives the passion. It really has an impact today and tomorrow on our food system and in people's lives, which is wonderful. But there is bigger picture things that we could be working on, such as policies and procurement policies, to basically force people to do things. I'm trying to always think of another way to say it, but really, that's what it is. And I have many great examples of that. One I'll quickly share with you to provide some context is there's a neighborhood plan going on through our official community plan, tons of agriculture land. It's already got a lot of equestrian, not really put in production. They want to change it. And so we established some agri-hoods, also just newly learned about those too. So that's the thing. We're just like, hey, agri-hood, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go for it. And now a developer's coming in and he's going to put 30 townhomes in, and 2 acres of his project are going to be donated back to the district for a community farm. So that's an example of how planning and working with community members and your partners and everyone, even developers, everyone, how important it is to have those connections to actually just sort of force change.
Awesome. Is that, should we throw it open to Liz and Melissa?
I can jump, yeah.
And another 30-minute snapshot from where you sit?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really standing out from what Crystal shared, well, 2 things. One is that while our approach and timeline in terms of operating in this change ecosystem are different, I think the outcomes that we're looking to have the most impact in are similar, in terms of like making sure that we are relocalizing our food systems, that's what our projects, that's the kind of end goal of all of this project work and network development. And the other piece that I've really struggled with when we first started kind of thinking about, we're operating in 3 areas. So it's the local food economy, it's the sustainability and food access. But that sustainability piece is really actually, like you said, Crystal, wrapped up in creating resilient, relocalized food systems. So the farmers that we're supporting are the ones who are most connected to the land, most invested in ensuring that there's diversity in the crops that they're growing and therefore resilience built in, most committed to ensuring that we have water long term and that there are other ecosystem services and carbon sequestration happening, which reminds us of even more so why we center support for those groups, and that sustainability and resilience aren't separate projects, but rather integrated and a central important focus in everything that we do to create relocalized food systems that are more resilient in tackling all these other things. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think it's, it's the reason I get out of bed every morning and come to do this job is the opportunity for food to be on the positive side of the climate change scale and not a contributor, but a carbon sink. And we can't do that without more production, especially in BC. But I think what's interesting is the different production capacity that each locality has across the province. And while we may want to relocalize our food system, there's some hard realities to deal with, like our valley's flooded for hydro generation. So we lost 200 farms. And, how do you come back from that? The 7 feet of snow that are still in my yard today. And so our ability to produce food throughout the year. And so that leads to the policy aspect needing to be beyond just the municipality and go to a regional scale, and then region to region be connecting. And I think that's really interesting. And I look to the Land to Table network to be a feeder for Revelstoke. Because you've got more production space, you've got those connections to farmers, and we've got this tiny little highway that my brother helps control the avalanches on to keep it open for us. And so I think there's so much going on in terms of food system change and mitigation to climate change, and having those relationships and those policies to go back to is so important to keeping those supply chains open, and knowing how to respond and react and when things happen, and landslides and avalanches and all those things. And so I think one of the big challenges, at least that we see around here, and I think, Crystal, you're in the same boat, is that challenging space between tourism and sustainability, and that drive for growth and development, eating up that land, that limited land that you do have, and just the community's priorities about what they want to be and how they want to get there, and that food systems aren't a huge economic driver in these little towns like Squamish and Revelstoke that are mountain communities and tourism driven. And so how to bring that up to the top of the pile in terms of how a municipality looks at the opportunities and policy opportunities and priorities, sorry. But I love AgriHood. I'm stealing it. It's mine now.
And AgriHood, I'm gonna so AgriHood is basically, like, you know how there's golf course development and things like that. So a bunch of years ago, people started doing actual, like, development around the farm, right, or like some kind of agriculture growing. And there's some really fabulous examples south of the border. Some they're starting to sort of percolate up here north of the border. I know out in Fernie, there was a little bit of sort of an AgriHood concept with the old farm in West Fernie. So I mean, yeah, these are neat ideas, right? Like, just think about a culture where it's like, I don't live by a golf course, I don't live by a farm where food is grown. I think that's super neat, but that's why I'm here. Are there questions for our panelists around this question of local food policy? We have about 5 minutes. If there's anything you heard from Melissa or Crystal or Liz. Shannon.
I'm curious to hear, because I know each of your communities would have issues with wildlife, and just establishing some of those food growing, like specifically bees or chickens in town, and how your municipalities may have gotten around that and reconciled the wildlife attractions with food production aspect. What do you think, Kimberley?
Ingrid, I'm wondering if you could just repeat the question a little closer to the speaker. I think I got 60% of that.
Yeah. So the question was, how do you navigate sort of the wildlife attractance concerns when you're looking at urban agriculture, like bees, like backyard chickens, I mean, I could even say, like, more fruit trees, so have that sort of in Kimberley, and I'm guessing Cranbrook, I don't know if Ron's going to leave a nod or not, right? These are they're genuine concerns from a food policy perspective, and on the minds of City Council whenever the backyard chicken question comes up.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for your question. In terms, I can speak to Squamish. Well, first off, we have a very active bear population, mostly black bears. And then we have a resident grizzly that comes and says hello, and then has to get tranquilized and move back out to the Squamish Valley. He also likes to visit the farms out there and eat some of their livestock sometimes. For us, the best practice was electric fencing for backyard setups. Now, there's probably over 20 backyard setups in Squamish or more just for bees or chickens. There's probably way more, but they're not registered. So they actually found the registration program quite a barrier. But there are some really great setups of fruit trees, bees, and chicken areas that do have really good electric fencing. It seems to work. So WildSafe BC provides standards for those. And they often can come and travel to your community to teach you how to actually set up. So what I think is a great idea is if you could actually have an example, perhaps in the community or in someone's front yard, that's a best practice example. And then people can actually drive by and see it. And then there's information online somewhere. So we also worked with we have a WildSafe BC coordinator in Squamish, and we work really closely with her on our urban agriculture projects, because it's not just backyard personal consumption. We're also doing commercial production in town as well. And that's a huge concern, because Squamish residents, and we all care about wildlife, we don't want them destroyed. As many of them are, because of the garbage issue. Like, they'll actually know what areas have their garbage pickup. It's pretty crazy. And so that seems to be the largest issue that we have. But, just setting up everything best practice from the start. We don't have open compost pits. We have bear-proof bins. Yes, they're a little more costly. Or if we are doing compost, we're making sure that people are well trained and know how to do it to prevent strong smells. And then any of those kind of smelly things might be fenced. In our community agriculture projects, we don't really do a lot of planting of sweet fruits. Unfortunately, we really want to, but we don't. There's enough wild berries around, and fruit trees and oak trees and things like that the bears can eat. So hopefully that helps a bit. And I would really just, my last thing would be, don't reinvent the wheel. Just look at what other communities have done and just steal and borrow. We all like to share all of our resources.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm going to move on just to keep us somewhat on schedule. So we have another question, and this one goes to Melissa. And I don't know, one of the moments where I have to hold the sheet far away. So how can a community benefit from having a food security action plan? And also really interested in your perspectives on the pros and cons of a community having like a food security coordinator. If you share some thoughts on that for the next few minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I got a little slide here to help keep me on track. I'm a huge fan of this sort of document to help guide the work, because it's working for us from my perspective, anyways. So 3 key benefits of a food security strategy. First and foremost is the process of making it in the first place, and that action of pulling together stakeholders, that it's a collaborative project and there's relationship building involved in that. Coming together over a shared vision, developing the goals that work for your community, and then the nuanced, more objectives and recommendations that come out of it really help to get all of those stakeholders on the same page with that same forward motion. And of course, you need to, before you know where you're going, you got to figure out what you've got already. So teasing out everything that you already have in terms of food assets. And I think Sophie's going to talk about your food asset mapping. Like, that's the ideal project to set you up to know where to go in the future. And I think it helps to draw attention to food security as a community issue that requires both collaboration, but also individual effort. So just, that process of coalescing all of those ideas and assets and forward action is a great process. The plan itself provides an amazing opportunity to guide the work and identify who's going to do that work. And for us, identifying a food security coordinator to help drive the work forward was really key, but that person can't do it all. So, if there's stuff listed to happen with the schools? Well, that's the school district that's working on that. And if it's things to do with wildlife stuff, then there's the wildlife group that, so there's a place for everybody in a plan like this. But I think in order to really have teeth, it's got to be data driven. There's got to be some sort of empirical measurement that you've got something to compare to and go back on, probably some dire stats about how food insecure your community is. And so having those components helps to make this sort of document official. And it's, a high level intervention. It can connect with other government plans, like a trail strategy, like a growth management plan, all those sorts of things. And although it's not a policy, if it can be an official plan supported by your municipality, it can help to fill those policy gaps that aren't in your official community plan in a little bit more of an informal way. And of course, a plan is a killer thing for securing funding and a reference point to report back on the work, and it just helps identify it as a community priority. And one thing I like about it is that it helps to identify the intersections of the food system with every other aspect of life and the community, and it affects us in so many different ways. And so this helps to draw out those connections, which is great. And then when it comes to the work, of course, having that lead, but having that stakeholder group carry on and steer the work forward is important. Tracking progress on those recommended actions that come out of the strategy and communicating that progress is really key, because it helps to keep that momentum going. And what I like about a strategy is that it can be kind of different from what Liz is talking about. It can be a long-term strategy, and therefore you can potentially, in some ways, break free of that project-specific funding and be a little bit more long-term and strategic. Although there's going to be all those project-specific pieces that are adding to that greater strategy. And like I mentioned before, like a community can't make up its own food system. It needs to be regional in scope. And so this is a document that helps to communicate what your needs are as a community and your potential points of intersection or intervention. So that's really great. And so is it an advantage, or what are the pros and cons of a food security coordinator position? I think the scale tips heavily on the pro side on the left there. And so, as I mentioned, it keeps the momentum going. But having that person in place can be a really important touch point. So, oh, hey, we've got this idea for a community food event, but I don't really know where to start. Where kitchen do I go to? How do I get a permit? How do I get the city on board? Well, I've got all that information at my fingertips, and I can send you off in the right direction. So being that touch point for how to progress smaller projects along is really helpful. But being that hub at the center of the wheel to connect those dots and understand how all of those smaller pieces are connecting to a greater picture of building resiliency in your local food system. And last but not least, that coordinator is accountable to that plan and implementing it and all of the work that goes behind it. So I think that's a really important aspect of a position like this. Some of the cons or some of the challenges around it are that you're kind of up against a little bit of legitimacy challenge of it's not a known position. It doesn't exist everywhere. So who is this person? What are they doing? Why should we pay them? You should pay them because volunteerism is too fragile. And paying somebody honors the importance of the work and the importance of the issue. And it keeps it going. And so you need that champion, you need that person who's going to have that holistic view and those connections and relationships in your community to drive it forward. And that may be hard to find. Maybe that person moves on. So there's a little bit of challenge to keep that momentum going within that particular person and that knowledge set. But I think a lot of it, as long as it's well documented along the way, can be passed on. And by no means am I not replaceable. Of course I am. And the funding for it. So there isn't, I set up streams of funding for food security coordinator position, going to your municipality, your regional district, getting creative at how you, approach funders like the Real Estate Foundation, organizations that get that strategic higher level aspect to the work is where you need to go, and it's not always there. So that is a challenge of it. So some pros and cons for sure, but I'm a big fan of my own job for sure.
I know, it was a bit of a setup, right? Liz Crystal, did any thoughts from where you said about food security action plan? Do you have one? Like, let's just start with the question. Do you have one in your area?
Sorry, go ahead. The first question was, do I have one in the area? And the second question.
I'm just going to ask you to keep your thoughts very brief. That to have a food security coordinator for a community.
So Squamish Squamish does not have a local food strategy, nor does it have a regional food strategy. However, it does have a regional food task force in which we are still part of, that's still loosely going, and there were some high priorities that had come out of that. So I love that we were doing kind of what Melissa's doing, but on a regional basis, and that was working with many of our Indigenous groups, farmers, food producers, food recovery folks, dietitians, etc. So it was a really great opportunity to come together and have those conversations. And then in Squamish specifically, there's so many great things already happening with sort of some of the really great stuff that food security coordinators will likely do, like Melissa and Revelstoke. But we were really behind on agriculture, so we decided to do an agriculture plan instead. And I would keep those always separate, because I do think that they're separate. A lot of times people are like, let's blend them together. Don't blend them. Keep them separate. And everything that Melissa has said, I totally agree with. Pay people, find university students to do work for you, all of those things.
This forums like this are so brilliant because we get to learn too. Like, you two just answered some really key questions that Land to Table has had, so our focus has been agriculture, economic development around agriculture, supporting farms. And through some United Way, a regional community food hub initiative funding, we are able now to enter more into the food access, food security realm. And so I'm just starting to see where we are lacking and the areas that we can move into. And what I was thinking is, so we have an agriculture plan, regional agriculture plan that was written in 2015. So it's out of date, but they want to complete the priority actions, more of those actions before they do a new one. And what we're starting to ask is, well, how does local food and food security play into that plan? But Crystal, what you're saying is, like, maybe we keep them as separate things. And so, like, there's a lot of uncovering to do there. And because we're also regionally focused, I wonder, we don't have a lot of buy-in from our municipalities specifically. Our electoral area directors get the importance of this work. Our municipalities are struggling to see how they can support food systems and why it's important to them. And so I think, like, that's the work that we have to do in the coming year, especially with a municipal election coming up. And these policy pieces and the opportunity for positions that focus on this work will be things that I bring up, and probably I'll be reaching out to you before then. But yeah, it's brilliant. It's great information.
Just to comment on a couple things you said there, Liz, the Central Kootenai Food Policy Council has some excellent resources around where food policy and municipalities intersect. And so some great documents that don't have to come from you. They come from other experts,
Yeah.
and can help to paint that picture for them. But also about that like idea of keeping ag and food security separate. I don't disagree in terms of the plans. And I sometimes get asked, well, how do you work with like community food system, but also work on household food insecurity? And I think they both need attention for sure. And an illustration of how these two things can come together really nicely is that I've supported some young industrious folks to start off their own farm. And one of their key objectives was supplying the food bank with food. But hey, you got to start your farm and be viable financially. So they are about to launch their third year of a crowdfunding campaign where they raised $5, $7, and this year $10,000 that then they pay themselves to grow food for the food bank. And so without that food system support, they wouldn't exist. And therefore couldn't support household food insecurity. Not my idea, was theirs, not taking credit for it, but it's genius. And I think it's a great illustration of the intersection between those two aspects of food security.
Melissa, I see that happening in a few different places, like the South Island Farm Hub and also other farms. They sort of basically subsidize fresh food for access, which I think for you folks in the room that are doing a lot of recovery work, and wanting to increase fresh local food sources, looking for funding, external funding for offsetting the cost to farmers to make sure that we're not cutting costs for farmers. We need to be paying farmers more. They need to be making a fair wage for the hard work that they do. And we should be proud about that.
Wow, so many ideas. Thank you, that are percolating. Yeah, wow. Questions from the group here in person, online, anything that you are wondering about, want to learn a little bit more about? Just we'll take a couple of minutes. Ron.
So thank you. And the initial introductions are guests from North Okanagan. One of your slides showed a total of, I think, $75,000 from the government agencies. What's that $75,000 annualized? Was that one time only, and what was it used for?
I think I caught most of that. So you saw the slide that outlined the initial funding that we got. And that funding was towards my time as a coordinator when we first set out over 18 months, and also towards some specific project work as well as some communications outcomes and events and things that we were hoping to do. But what is key to that when we first started out in relation to the conversation that we are having here is that funding came from the electoral area directors in our region. And that was for Land to Table to specifically support priority actions from our regional agricultural plan over a 2-year period. And so I think that was a really beautiful connection to government, which is similar to what Melissa is saying, where you've got a plan and someone is, overseeing that and accountable for outcomes associated with that plan. But because we were just finding our feet and not really well established as a network, I wouldn't say we were able to leverage that opportunity in terms of impact. And we're just not connected enough yet. And then the regional district kind of said, okay, I think we funded you enough. Now go and show us like what you can actually do before you come back and ask us for more money, which is tricky, puts us in a really tricky situation. So we started off strong in terms of that support, and then it just seemed to kind of wane. We're hoping to ask for it back.
I might just add, I think Lizzie brings up a really important issue that Melissa and I and other communities, I've spoken to other community food leaders about this, is how do we pay just for the centralization, organization, like essential work that needs done so we can continue to grow and leverage the funding that we get. Well, first off, reach out to all your community groups, including all three of us, because I know for myself, I'm happy to share my grant resource and database with you. Build relationships with funders for sure. And something that can be really helpful is applying, like it's quite easy, low-hanging fruit, is applying for funding for people aged 18 to 30. So then you can start to just give tasks that you don't have time for, to start applying for funding and leveraging funding and stuff. So it's kind of, you kind of got to get a little bit creative. And I also think it's okay to ask for funding to kick something off. For example, when we started the Food Policy Council, I'd asked for $50,000 from the Real Estate Foundation 5 years ago. We were the first Food Policy Council funded. And they gave it to us, and we had a ton of different objectives to achieve. We achieved them all and more, but it really set us up for success, which allowed us to build a relationship with the regional district as well as our local municipality. We work within two governments. And then we were able to start creating plans, and now we get funding from them sustainably every year to implement the plans. But I think if you can clearly say what your objectives are, then and advocate for that, acknowledging that you're starting something, you're growing something, and you have clear objectives. And I think it's reasonable to ask your governments, based off of what other governments do across BC, to have annual support. And I'm always happy to have that side conversation anytime.
Yeah, that's great. I think we decided we would take a year to do these projects, get the project funding, and then go back and say, hey, this is our impact. This is what we need ongoing support for, which is unrestricted time. Yeah.
All right, you guys, I'm going to have to close this conversation and go to the last question so that we can, because I say if any of you want to just stand up and stretch for a moment or two, we will be done. We'll be wrapping this up in about 15 minutes. The last question goes to you, Liz, and sorry, I need to get it in front of me, so I'm getting it correctly. So knowing you're in that land to table space, what have been the challenges and opportunities of taking that collective impact approach that you described? What has been your experience of working with the small to medium-sized producers and weaving them into the mix?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that our conversation so far is a good culmination into this question, and I think it's been answered in some ways. So, like I said, we're 4 years old. I would say that it's taken us 2.5 years to find our feet as a network, trying to align with this collective impact process, and now kind of moving into something that feels like a better fit for us in our region. I would say the first 2.5 years were really focused on engagement and getting a sense of what our food system stakeholders and actors need, where the gaps are, and where we can take action. We started with part-time coordination work, and we've moved into it this last year. I think with COVID, the way it is pushing us online, and with access to some new funding, we've gone from a very specific economic development focus around farmers and agriculture, and we've been able to move into the other areas or pillars of work that we know are important to food systems, relocalizing, creating local food systems work, which is around resilience and food access, but still really ensuring that we center support for farmers. So I'll give you some examples, because I think that that's the best way to share what we're doing and how we're doing it. So there's kind of three projects that I'm most excited about and proud about from this year. One comes from United Way funding that I mentioned, that's allowed us to hire a coordinator to help support the role and the work around food access, where we've been able to survey our emergency food providers in our region, which is a group we haven't been able to connect with much to date, and get a sense of what their challenges are in terms of accessing food, and now to start to map out how we can better connect, like you both have been saying, connect our emergency food providers and our food access programming with some of our local farmers. And so we've been working with key partners to do that over last year, and we're expanding to do that this next year. Another thing that we were able to do this year, where we're weaving in support for local farmers, we had wildfire burn through our region last summer. The Okanagan Indian Band, one area of reserve land in particular, was very impacted, where 10 homes were burned down. Their only grocery store was burned down in quite a rural area, and a number of residents lost their refrigerators and freezers. So they lost all their stored, culturally important food. And so because we've been working with the Okanagan Indian Band through a different project, we had a relationship there, and they came to us to say, hey, we need help. We need meat for our residents that was lost for the winter. At the same time, we've been hearing from some of our local small scale farmers that they were also significantly impacted by the heat dome and the drought, and feed shortages that have resulted. And so through this meat drive that we undertook, we were able to raise funds. We raised $8,000. And with that funding, we were able to purchase meat from small scale farmers. And we were also able to pay an Okanagan Indian Band resident to hunt for deer and process that deer, so that we've been able to stock the freezers of OKIB residents, in particular those who were impacted by the fire, but also support our small scale farmers who have been impacted by the climate extremes. So that was something that we felt particularly proud of in terms of making those connections and weaving in farmer support. And then another project that we undertook in September ahead of the federal election was an Eat, Think, Vote online forum in partnership with Food Secure Canada, where we brought our federal election candidates together online. And we had a panelist of local farmers or farmer representatives talking about the issues that they wanted federal candidates to pay attention to and the solutions that they wanted to see those candidates advocate for. And that resulted in our re-elected conservative candidate reaching out to our Green Party person and saying, hey, you had some really great ideas in that food forum. I'd like to connect to talk about what we can do so that I can better represent the farmers in our region and the growers in our region. And so I think the opportunities for us are like, those were projects that we've been able to just respond to and do. Not that we had funding for my time to do it, but we did it. And the challenges, of course, are exactly that. We don't have the unrestricted funding to allow us to be nimble in that way, to dedicate staff time to things that our network and community are saying are important. Yeah, I think I could talk about other projects and examples, but I know I'm almost done.
All right, thanks, Liz. And again, any thoughts from you, Melissa and Crystal, weaving in the small to medium-sized farmers in the, as we look to strengthen relocalized food systems?
I can speak a little bit briefly on our experience, Liz. It's really cool to hear how you were able to respond when folks lost their homes. It kind of reminds me of some work that we did when COVID had happened and how everyone was like all of a sudden panicking that they needed to grow a garden. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah. And no one had resources. And so we just rallied and did what we needed to do, received some funding and just did what needed to be done. And I think that's one of the benefits of working collectively and having these roots within a food system, that it's everybody working together and they're not separate. Because when things do happen in the community, that centralized person like each of us and probably other people also in the community will have like quick access to be able to just respond super quickly and sustainably and be thinking outside the box. I might just was going to mention something. I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry. Melissa, over to you. I'll come back.
Yeah, no problem. Interject when it comes back. Yeah, I think there's a lot of advantage to having networks established so that when crisis happens, you already got your group to go to. You host your meeting and you go, oh my God, this is happening. What's going on for you guys? What do you need? Who's got what? And so whether that's farmers or chefs or food retailers or restaurateurs, like whatever it is, whatever aspect of the food system, if they already have a connection to others, then yeah, you can be so much more reactive and in the long run, more resilient. And I think about lots of examples of that, like, you know, when the atmospheric river happened, we got cut off from food, and I went around to all the grocery stores, and all our little grocers were totally fine. In fact, they were just doing some extra trips over to Liz's neighborhood to pick up food from those local producers, whereas Save-On was empty. And so that's just an example of the resiliency of a locally connected food system. When the pandemic hit, I pulled together the chef network and we pumped out 10,000 meals for our community. Like, that wouldn't have happened if we didn't already have those connections. So I think that's really what I'm picking up here is those networks. Even when you don't have a lot to work on right away, they're there and they're reactive when things happen. So I think that's a great thing.
Remember what I was going to say. Sorry about that. Just with regards to farmers, in terms of long-term planning, maybe less in response to crises or urgent or disastrous things that happen, but we work really closely with our farmers and have right from the get-go when we started. And I think it was one thing I've learned is that as we work on removing barriers for new farmers entering the agriculture world, or things changing in our community, the farmers are the ones that I go to say, okay, I'm working on this project. What can you tell me about this land, the space to farm on, the water? There's so many tiny questions that go into establishing things, and the farmers have been time and time again just like this core group of people that I really value. Another thing is I acknowledge that farmers don't have a lot of extra time. So if I'm using their time, I will often pay them for their time. So that's just a considerate thing that I'd like to acknowledge and love for that to be shared. So if I'm getting someone to host a workshop or host a land linking workshop with young agrarians, or even participating in a farm panel discussion, or I'm going out there to tour their site, I'm always offering an honorarium to say thank you. But anyways, yeah, they have so much experience to share, and it's really valuable.
Great, thank you. Again, I'm going to open it up. Are there any questions here for our panelists? Okay, and is there anything online? Nothing coming online. All right, so I'm gonna pull this to a close. So here's your challenge panel. I'm going to give you, 1 minute each. 1 minute. Could each of you speak to what you see as the next frontier in relocalizing, strengthening our food system, just from where you sit? What's your next frontier? 1 minute.
I'm ready. I'll go.
Oh, you beat me.
I can only speak locally. Here, we need to grow more food, and we need to be nimble in how we do that, using regenerative techniques that mitigate climate change, don't add to it, and can respond to climate change situations as they come up, because they will come up. And it's hard to think about the future because it feels unsure, but we got to try. And I think we got to try to produce more food.
I think that was under a minute. Wow. I think the next frontier for us ahead of this next municipal election, which is a big one, right, in terms of impact and change that we absolutely have to have and see, We need to be able to gather our local electeds and candidates in conversation about why food systems work, and food systems resilience is so important. So that's what I'm hoping to do and find funding for in this next year. And I think probably get those folks on board in terms of funding this work is another big step. And then for Land to Table, it's also learning about how we can be a good advocate for all of the organizations and partners that we're working for and where they need us to step up. That's what I'm thinking about.
For myself, I'm really stubborn, and I really don't like systems that don't work. It's so frustrating for me. And now that I know, now that I understand the system, I'm like, oh, this is how this changes. Okay, no problem. I'm going to work on that. Now I'm going to find funding to do that work. So I'm focused, similar to Melissa, on getting seeds in the ground and making sure people understand the value of this. But I am also just as motivated to remove barriers, bureaucratical barriers that are stupid and need to get thrown out and rewritten, and just so people can easily access land, work on cool projects, and advance the work we did. Imagine if there was just no barriers, all of the things that we would be doing. And I also think paying attention to some of the larger strategies that are happening nationally, and where does your organization sit with the National Coalition for Healthy Food, for the National Food Policy Council, et cetera, et cetera. I think working with people is so important. And I hope that I hear from some of you to say, hey, Crystal, I love what you said about this. I need your help. I'm like, yes, I'll send you whatever I have. So anyways, thank you.
Melissa, Liz, Crystal, your passion for this is so palpable. I just want to thank the three of you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. Again, we're developing our local conversations and coming to grips with where to put our focus. And when I say our, everybody in this room is going to have a different, sort of a different sense of what that means for those individuals or their organizations they're working with. But certainly hearing, just really hearing the importance of, coming together, forging those relationships as a foundation for being able to do this good work. So thank you for all the inspiration. And we're gonna let you go. I'm just gonna invite like a round of applause. Your communities are lucky to have. All right. Hello, everybody online. I hope you had a nice break and feel caught up on email and got some fresh air and all that. Welcome back. We are into the second half or last third, I'm not sure, one or the other of this event. And so I'd like to just invite Meredith Thompson to come up and share a few words about this Kim Cranbrook Food Hub that created this summit and invited you here. So, Meredith.
I'm going to stand behind the podium here so I can put my notes down. Thank you all for coming. This has been an incredible experience today. Maybe I'll just introduce myself. I'm Meredith, as I introduced at the beginning. I work for Community Connection Society of Southeast BC. And for about 4 to 5 years now, we've been working in the realm of food programs. So doing food literacy programs. We run the public produce garden. We started Cranbrook Food Recovery. We have a rentable commercial kitchen called Farm Kitchen. So we've got kind of our fingers in a lot of different pots in terms of food programs, food security projects, the grassroots programs that are kind of operational here. But something we've been craving is the connection with other groups. And the panelists did talk about that, how creating that network and working with other groups to find ways to collaborate feels like a very important goal, feels like a very worthwhile goal. I'm going to take this off for a second. So last summer, when the funding opportunity came up through the United Way Regional Community Food Hub initiative, it seemed like an excellent and very unique opportunity to work together. So, in collaboration with the other organizations that have presented themselves here, the Cranbrook Food Bank, ourselves through Cranbrook Food Recovery, the Healthy Kimberley Food Recovery Depot, and the Kimberley Food Bank, we began. So, what we started was the discussion. What we started were regular meetings so that we could connect. Our goal with these meetings was essentially, number one, to strengthen the connection between the two communities. So a lot of what we do in Cranbrook and a lot of what we do in Kimberley, they're very similar. We're very closely tied as communities, but it often feels like we operate in silos. However, we wanted to give ourselves the opportunity to make that cross-community connection and see if there were opportunities to work together. To share resources, including informational resources and systems. How do we go about doing what we do at Cranbrook Food Recovery, and what are ways that we can support Kimberley Food Recovery, and vice versa. And we've had a lot of learning. And same thing with the Cranbrook Food Bank and the Kimberley Food Banks. We've had so much learning passed within these meetings. We wanted to find ways to integrate and streamline our services. So there are things that are very common between the two communities. So are there ways to streamline those services and avoid duplication, support efficiencies? Another thing we were able to do in these meetings is examine what some of the overarching needs are in each community. And again, find similarities between those two communities. Where are we seeing gaps? Where are we seeing needs that we hadn't identified before? Oh, and one other opportunity through this funding was to connect actually provincially as well. So United Way Regional Community Food Hub, they were also meeting. Each food hub in each of the different communities was meeting in a community of practice. So we were able not only to connect between the two communities, but also up to sort of that provincial level and get a little snapshot of perspective of what other people are doing in other communities. So as I said, this Food Hub project was a start. It's absolutely not representative of all the food actors in Kimberley or in Cranbrook. As you can see by the Cranbrook Free Food Guide, there are so many different groups working with passion, putting all their efforts into supporting community members and building the food security of each community. So we're not representing ourselves as the food hub. What we wanted to do was plant the seed, start the conversation, and then expand it, which is why this food summit is so exciting. Being able to open up the conversation, not only to those panelists who are able to kind of give us a perspective on what they are doing and give us a possible vision for where we could direct our energy over the next few years, but also to connect with everybody in here, open up the conversation and make sure that we're bringing it out and making sure everybody has a voice. I think that's it. Sorry, I've got notes, which I usually don't do, but I personally have really appreciated the time that our hub members have put into regular meetings. I am very much looking forward to seeing where we go next in partnership with people in this room as well. So thank you all for participating here. It's been thrilling. Yeah.
Do you want to introduce Kate?
Yeah. And actually, another thrilling thing that Kate's going to present to us. So not only did we have monthly meetings, we tackled a few specific projects, and we tackled quite a large project, which was the food asset map. It was mentioned in some of the panelists. One of the panelists mentioned sort of mapping resources, and we were able, with support from Canada Summer Jobs, to hire Kate in order to roll that project forward. And without any further words from me, I will let you discuss it.
Okay. So, yeah, as Meredith said, my name is Kate, and I was hired to do the food asset map and also conduct the food system survey, along with a lot of help and support, and especially So with that said, so we can, we'll just share the current version of the asset map. You can preliminary results from the survey.
You just tell me next slide.
Okay, go ahead and share next slide.
Even after this one?
Oh, no. So before I show the asset map, we'll just say what is included on it and kind of why we did it and where the idea came from. So our asset map is based off of Long Street Policy Council, and that was Crystal, who everyone saw in the panel discussion, provided a lot of support on that. In terms of what a food asset is, we consider it to be any organization, business, institution that contributes to food security via food production, recovery, storage, processing, distribution, or increasing food literacy. So we map all the locations of food assets to be Kimberley Cranbrook area. So yeah, in terms of the bonus map, we use very similar categories to Long Street Policy Council, and we use 6 categories and then broke it down further into subcategories. And you'll see numbers beside the subcategories, and that shows how many there are that we recorded. However, I would like to note that this is not the comprehensive list that you need. We're still collecting data and information on it. Well, go ahead. This is what the asset map looks like. And Ingrid is actually over here. I'm going to click it at the bottom.
No. Yeah, we're still sharing?
Yeah. And on that side panel on the left, there's a button that says preview.
Okay, I'm gonna try and look there. Okay, sorry. Let me get right in here. Preview. Oh, there. Okay, great.
So this is what the map will actually look like for users, and it's posted on Google My Map, so it's really user friendly. And yeah, you can go by category, and it allows you to find like food banks or food recovery depots. In terms of what information is actually included for each asset, you could click on one just to show an example. So if you love farming, it shows what category they belong to, their type of asset, where they're located, and then a brief description, as well as contact information for their food asset.
Should we, let's zoom in on some others just to get more of a flavor. About one from Kimberley and one from Cranbrook. I don't know. What icon should I click on here, Kate?
Go brown star.
Brown star. Ah, the food depot.
Yeah. So some of the information that was provided in the description is pretty detailed, and it shows how these various organizations contribute to food security and what kinds of services they provide.
How about we'll go down the road? Whoops. I should zoom out. This is just reckless driving, other words. I don't know. Should we click on? What's this? This is Cranbrook Alliance Church. Here we go. So just a little bit of information. So obviously the information will depend on what folks sent in, but yeah.
And we collected all of that via the survey, which you can actually move on to next thing. Everyone's good with the map. This isn't a completed version, but it will be made available to the public.
Could you speak up?
Oh, sorry. It's not the completed version, but it will be made available pretty soon.
All right, so moving on.
Okay. So alongside the app, we also did a food system survey. And we collected information from all the same people who we have on the asset map as well. So this survey really gave us information on various strengths and weaknesses and challenges and opportunities, various assets in our region. And also it shed light on how various food programs and asset holders interact with each other as well. Before I get into things, I will mention that this is a very preliminary snapshot of results. And in the presentation, I'll just be touching on some of the key themes that have emerged. They're quite obvious after reading through the results. And actually, just one other note, limitations. This is still a bit of a work in progress. We are still collecting survey answers. And what was the other thing? Oh, yeah. In terms of sample size, it's quite small for some categories, so may not be representative of the whole. So that's it. So we have responses from 20 community organizations, 13 local producers, 7 market retail stores, and 2 schools. And community organizations is a very broad category, but for the purposes of the presentation, I just condensed it down to time to be safe. We asked respondents to full 10 questions, and in the next few slides, we'll just give a broad overview of what everyone said, and then get into specifics. So, one of the first questions we asked was, what do you believe are the most significant barriers for clients and customers in accessing food? And respondents overwhelmingly said affordability, which makes a lot of sense. We also asked if anyone has, we asked, it's looking at 2 screens at once, confusing. We asked about underutilized food-related assets, capacity, and resources, and about 1/3 said yes, they do have underutilized assets, and that includes things like churches having underutilized kitchens, some markets and retail stores having pantries or dairies that isn't being recovered. We also asked if asset holders have plans to expand within the next few years, and 50% said yes. And I'm sure we'll hear about it in the room and we share later, but some of those include things like the local co-op, things in growing spaces, and more. And then, so the last yes or no question that we asked was about critical resources, and if any of the critical resources asset holders rely on our grid. And about 40% said yes, and that's due to things like lack of funding, staffing shortages, climate change, and more, for sure. We'll get into the specifics a little bit. We'll start with schools. So one of the really interesting things in the survey is that when asked to name critical resources they rely on, most schools said Salvation Army, local food recovery, and food banks are the main ones. In terms of challenges, the rising cost of food was the huge one. And then volunteer shortage was seen by 1 school. And one thing that also came up with the survey that was interesting is 2 schools. So 20% said that some students were accepting the perception of appearing needy. Then we have urban producers. So there's a lot of responses that came back to this category. We have responses from 10 local farmers and 3 community gardens. Local producers are facing a lot of challenges, which came back as really clear from the results of this survey. However, despite that, 70% did say they have plans to expand operations in the next few years, which is quite above average. So some of these expansions include new greenhouses and increased growing spaces, while others actually plan to start new education programs as well. When asked if the critical resources they rely on are presently at risk, 54% did say yes, which is also above average. And across the board, most asset holders in this category said that access to grants and labor and soil were at risk. And also lack of market data was a common challenge as well. Then market retail stores. So, a lot of market retail stores, I think, one of their huge strengths that they came through clearly in results from this are the fact that a lot of them partner with organizations like the Food Bank and the Food Recovery. In terms of challenges, it's pretty clear across the board that labor shortages and supply chain disruptions are pretty big stressors. And then markets also did respond to say that lack of funding was an issue for them as well. Okay, and then finally there's community organizations. So this was a huge category, and I think, yeah, in terms of strength, these organizations provide so much food to the community that I'm just learning more about and community side. And I think even though this is such a broad category, it was pretty clear that a lot of the challenges these organizations are facing are pretty common. So that is lack of funding. Almost every community organization that responded said that funding was an issue for them, especially access to funding for operations and administrative work. And that kind of ties into some of the other challenges they're facing, such as being overly reliant on volunteers and having an aging volunteer base as well. And then some organizations also noted that staffing shortage was a challenge as well. And then in terms of next steps, so we're going to look a lot more at survey results and release them around the end of April, and something that's a little bit more comprehensive and detailed and really looks at what the opportunities are based on the survey results, and also does a bit more of an